Eccoci qua, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Avevo detto che oggi saltavo, ma poi mi sono reso conto di aver invitato Thierry Verdier di avere l'appuntamento oggi un po' in anticipo con lui, e quindi perché non farlo in diretta invece che registrare. Sarà breve and it will be in English. Il tema è le tensioni sociali francesi, che abbiamo già discusso con Adriano ed altri, e farò a Thierry la stessa domanda. Hello Thierry.
Hello, hi Michele.
Good to see you. So
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. Thierry Verdier is professor of economics and director of the Paris School of Economics, which is a graduate and program that also involves obviously research center, and that aggregates a number of graduate research center university in the city of Paris. Correct?
Yes, correct. But I'm not the director of PSC.
You're not?
I'm director at École des Hautes Études of different.
À l'École des Hautes Études. Okay. Well, the question for Thierry is not different from that I have asked to other, which I announced to him before starting the registration, the recording. So why is it that social issues, conflicts, even very serious things, but like somebody being killed in France, and in particular in Paris, tend to overflow into street violence, big riots, and major clashes. But then, at least to an external observers like I am, I have not a big knowledge of France, just a little one. The impression is the social structure, the political power, the economic power, and even the set of values remain rather stable, move little over time. Am I wrong? What's your take on that? What leads to these very frequent riots?
Well, I think that one aspect of the frequent riots is related to the historical political culture in France. In French people, I would say, they have a kind of a technology to go in the streets, right? I mean, from the French Revolution in 1970, long time ago, 1789, we started already to be in the streets all the time when we disagree with the king, when we disagree with the government, when we disagree with the president, and all those things. So that went on all the 19th century the same way, and eventually even in the 20th century also we have this technology to go in the streets, generally to demonstrate, but often to get into riots because of the connection with the government, which is not always very peaceful.
I mean, it's a classical case of cultural path dependence. That's kind of stuff you study.
Yeah, this is a little bit like this. That's right. I mean, that really this is the kind of reflex, a social reflex. People don't talk. They fight first and then they start to talk eventually. The second feature is about what you say in terms of the stability of institutions. I think that the stability of the institutional setup is relatively more recent. I think it started more in the after de Gaulle with the introduction of the Fifth Republic and the institutions of the Fifth Republic, which provided a lot of stability as long as the president is having the majority in the parliament. Before that, I mean, the Fourth Republic, the Third Republic, we had a lot of perturbances as well. I mean, governments were shifting away, and but now, I mean, for quite some years, we had this kind of stability between the executive power and the legislative power, with a presidential system, which actually is not really a presidential system. It's a presidential parliamentary system, but it felt like a very strong presidential system as long as the president and the majority in the parliament are on the same side, which was the case in most situations in France in the Fifth Republic. Except that now we are exactly as a kind of a tipping point because for some kind of strange reason, we're in a situation where the parliament reflects exactly a proportional system, mostly a parliamentary system, where one third, one third, one third of the legislative system is divided. So we have to have the solution will be a coalition government, which, given the political French culture, doesn't seem to emerge. And the other part, which is the technology of riots in the streets, with this side of a sort of semi-parliamentary system without the political culture to make coalitions, is creating presumably a point where many things can happen. It might just go this way, but we might be at a point where a perturbation or can happen.
Let me understand if I let me see if I understand your argument right. You see, as long as the president has so as far as the violence is concerned, let's call it path dependence.
Yeah.
Since the at least the French Revolution, at least violence on the street was successful for a while, or at least gave the impression of being so. And even Thermidor at the end was violence on the street, even if somewhat different. Uh, the French, it's part of the French culture to fight very strong from the beginning and then see if there is room for a bargain or a compromise. On the other hand, you say on the political side, this allows for a stable government and power situation to the extent that the president has a true majority. When it comes to a situation like this, in which in the parliament there is equidistance, then what? Then the riots are relevant. The riots have
No, I
a
don't think that the riots are necessarily relevant, but there's a kind of an echo chamber. It's used then in an instrumental fashion by the political sides. I mean, as you can see now, the Mélenchon left wing part is using that in one particular way. The Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen is using that in a different way, but basically gaining more support because actually she doesn't
yes.
say much, doesn't take positions very
But that
clearly,
was a
except
bit true also at the time of the first one I remember in my lifetime, which is 68, right? The spring
yeah,
of
60,
68.
yeah,
De Gaulle used it to actually strengthen his power with the referendum and so on, right?
yes, which he lost actually.
Yeah, he
And
lost, but he gained in terms of popularity of himself, or am I wrong?
no, I mean he won the popularity with the referendum in 65, I think, when he came to power, when he changed basically the rule of the constitution. But in 68, he basically put himself into danger because he went to that referendum which he lost and then he left power.
Oh, you're
And
right. You're right. You see, I remember it wrong. You're right. That's how, in fact, Pompidou went to power.
yes, exactly, that's the moment where Pompidou went in and reestablished, yes, the through the Fifth Republic, the stability you mentioned. That is, after 68, although many things happened, certainly in the background, in the social context and underlying latent uh, changes in the French society, definitely a number of things happen, but on the surface, the big demonstration that happened in 68, after Pompidou came back, there were some big sitting called the agreements of Grenelle, where there was negotiations, especially for wages and a number of social conditions at work, which probably settled a little bit the steam of
The
the
anger on the
68.
worker side.
Yes, exactly, the worker side, and then things settled on a different path, which was much more stable. That's true. But I think that is because also Pompidou had the strong majority in the parliament, and everything went not as business as usual, but almost, absorbing the shock, at least politically, in a way which was relatively stable. But
Your reading of the events, your political reading of the events in this time is the two, let's call it wings, the left and right, Mélenchon and Le Pen, are saying, well, there are the riots in the street. Let's use it to eliminate this anomaly, which is the strange president that has won 2 terms with some troubles both times, but has won them by placing himself in the middle, but does not really have a parliamentary support in the middle. And actually, can you elaborate on this? The country is strange. It's like both left and right must have, if Macron is president, must have a relative majority of voters, that while they go for the left and right party, when it comes to the bottom line, say, well, better have a more balanced character at Palace de l'Élysée.
yes, I think that what Macron felt was that mostly the political French culture is somehow on the left or the right, but the median voter is always almost in the center. So he positioned himself somehow in the center, and for some reason he got it. So he
The
has
country
one third.
Duverger is the only one that makes Duverger work.
Yes, maybe so, but I think he's positioned himself in the middle, and which was a big mistake before in France, because when you were positioning yourself closer to the middle, the left of the wing was moving towards the middle and basically getting you out. But considering now the configuration, when you have one third, and one third of the French people who are divided, then he has somehow some market in the middle, and grabbing a little bit of the other sides, he gets his position in terms of relative majority. Uh,
And in your view, how much in these riots is racial, how much is religious, and how much is just the old story that when you're poor and discriminated and for a reason or another not facing a great future, your anger is such that if you have the opportunity, you just break up everything?
I think it's partly uh, poverty and economic integration, which didn't work. And up to relatively recently, I think that was mostly poverty. But I mean, in the last sort of 20 years or so, we saw a development of something else. If you take the riots that happened with Sarkozy in 2005, where there were big fights for 3 weeks and so forth under the government of Chirac, essentially the elements there were already the ones that we realized right now. So there's one element which triggers, which is somehow this law that was passed in 2017 in France, that gave a different possibility for the police forces to shoot. That was an important element. So that's kind of a technical element which creates a trigger, a catalyst, because now the police people can interpret when they are in a situation which is very dangerous or not. Before, they had to be in an immediate situation of danger for their lives or somebody else to be able to shoot, which is the definition of legitimate defense. Now they are more free to interpret whether they will be or not in a situation which is danger. And that created, because of lack of training on the police forces, because it's something recent, it's 2017 that they passed this law, and the fact that the police structure is not well organized compared, let's say, to the military police in the countryside, which has the same law but has much less violent deaths due to police action. I think it creates one catalyst for what we saw. Now, on the other hand, when you get into the fundamentals of the riots, basically the fundamentals of the riots in 2005 are the same as right now, almost 20 years later. That is a situation where you have pockets of poverties, not a good social integration of minority groups. And on top of that, now you have a feeling that, well, you have some identity dimensions that connects to ethnic identity and religious dimension, which is of course related to the Muslim origins of many of those people, especially among the youngs. There was a recent sociology survey that looked at the young people after the events of 2005, and recently by Institut Montaigne as well, among the young people between 18 and 24 years old, what were their perception with respect to one particular question, which is, do you think that a society like France, which was which had a colonial past, was racist and will be racist in the future? And on that question, basically 25% of the French people who are from foreign origin, with both parents not born in France, and something like 23% of the the young, which are from parents of Muslim origin, agree completely with that assertion. While if you look at young people who are not from parents not born in a foreign country, which are French parents born in France, the percentage is 9%. So you see that really there is a fringe of the population among the young people that typically have changed their beliefs on what they can expect from the French society, not only in terms of social promotion, but also from a sort of kind of cultural integration background
So
in a
you feel the
social
identity, the cultural integration is quite important, because there is this observation. France has this strange behavior of it. Strange, yeah, I would say not so standard behavior of poverty percentages over time, right? The decrease long. France used to have a huge percentage of people below the poverty line back in the 80s and 70s, respect to other Western countries, even more than United States. That is considered. And then it went down for about 15, 20 years, according to the number I see. But then it reverses around 2004, 2005, 2000. In fact, before the so-called
yeah.
great crisis, and the factors, whatever it is, I don't know. I am asking you. And then it keeps going. I mean, it's about almost, say, 18, 20 years that percentage slowly but surely keeps climbing up. But your point is that it's more there's also a very strong cultural, how can I say, this is not my place, this is not my lifestyle, this is not what I like, I want to live in a different way.
Yeah, I think that now it's mixed with this. Before it was only a question of social integration. In particular, I think that the first wave of migrants that came to France, there was a strong selection bias. They wanted to be integrated, socially speaking, economically speaking, in the French society. Now we are talking about the second and third generation. They lost the feeling that they can get a future, economically speaking, in the French society, and they turned to other sort of mechanisms. And on top of that, the illegal economy in many of those neighborhoods is pretty large. So whether, meaning by this, all the drug trafficking and the gangs, when you think about the north of Marseille or eventually the suburbs in Paris, this is quite a significant informal economy. And even if you're not involved directly into the drug trafficking, you are involved eventually indirectly by knowing people who know people who are involved into it, or your own business depends somehow on the market generated by the money that goes in this area. And and then turned to something different that created a different sort of local culture where you have definitely much more of a banalization of violence, and as well there's much more of a connection to a particular local identity, which is ethnic related or religious related, because of the high concentration of people of the same type in those areas.
Thierry, you know United States. So how much does this resemble the situation of the in the African American ghettos in the United States?
I think it gets closer to that. That's exactly one of the concerns of the French thinkers or policymakers, is that it gets really closer to the ghettoization, let's say, people call it like this in France, of the sort of American society where community groups are just isolated from each other, and
Right,
they don't get a sense of what was part of the French Republican spirit of being all
right.
integrated together in the same society. And that's really something that happens. What is kind of strange is that if you look at urban policy in France, it has been a strongly emphasized. I mean, governments have spent millions and billions of euros. Recently, there was a report by the Cour des Comptes that looked at exactly the success of the evaluation, the impact of the urban policy, politique de la ville in France. And they found that we are spending something like 33 billion euros per year, which is quite significant, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And
That's about
there's
a good more than 1% of your GNP.
and it's not yes, it's not giving the results that
And
people were expecting.
you mean spent in intervention in urban life, eliminate ghettos, improve quality of.
Yeah, this is about trying to target what they call uh, neighborhoods we are of priority for social insertion and promotion, which so it involves a bunch of policies related to social housing, a
I
bunch
see.
of policies to
That's
subsidies.
definitely a substantial amount, and there are no results. Yeah, because the element there is a bit the skin color element, not as strong, but it's there. The ghetto element, the speaking a language that is similar but different, and then the sense that I suppose I'm trying to do cheap sociology here, but correct me if I'm wrong. But I suppose that the sense of having been imported as slaves, or not you obviously, but your ancestors, and having been the children of people that were once upon a time colonized and moved to this country because there was an effect of being a colony, may create strong sense of estrangement. No,
I think this was not the case. I mean, in the
no.
60s, no, I don't think
Right,
it was.
right. That's the story that everybody says, but I don't know the French of the. I mean, I came there first. What was it, middle '70s, but I was just a student living at Cité
No, I
Universitaire.
think that
Uh,
the perception of the French people from the ex-colonies up to the 70s, end of the 70s, I mean, was not like this. It was like, okay, there's a high demand for labor. People were going.
yeah, yeah,
Eventually, there were eventually scholarships. I mean, the University of Bordeaux was the one welcoming all the young people who were educated young people in the Caribbean islands of the French territories. Uh, as an example, my mother was an example of this. So the perception was completely different. That you were sort of in a moving society. The thing stopped basically in the 80s, where things started to deteriorate with the fact that the
what do you
economy
think is the
slowed
reason
down.
why it stopped?
You think what? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Somebody decided to turn on the engine of their motorbike right under my window. In the moment I was, um, what do you can you point to something structural, something cultural, some policy, or a change in the school system or whatever that has led to this change of attitude and view, right? I'm no longer trying to find a better living and achieving it because I'm on a path to integration and moving upscale, but there is no path to integration and moving upscale. I'm just a minority that will be mistreated forever, period.
I think it started with the late 80s and then went on sort of slowly in up to 2000 and got to the first the big shock was those riots in 2005 where people really saw something different there, but it was something underlying. It was latent. It was moving up slowly. I think from the second to the third generation of people who were coming from migrants origins. Definitely schools where the school system didn't adapt to the change of the population of people who came there. The policy that sort of my impression is the origin of all this is the policy of called subsidizing the family return of people who are migrants in France in the late 70s. After the oil shocks, basically Giscard d'Estaing decided that migrants in France, who were temporary migrants at the time, could stay in the country and bring their families. And they brought the families there. Uh, and it happened just at the moment where you had the French economy stuck by the oil shocks, where the growth of France basically went down. It was the end of the 30 glorious years of French growth, what they call like this. At this point,
Same in Italy, don't worry, same boat.
but at this point, actually, most of those people were coming from North African origins, in particular. They were employed in the automobile sector. And the other migrants at the time were the Portuguese, who were employed in the services or the concierge and the construction sector. But the ones in the big firms, there was a major restructuring. The fathers lost their jobs. So fathers without jobs make no money at home. Mothers in those families had to go and work to sustain the family. Kids were left by themselves. The authority in the family started to decline, and then you started to have the delinquents and the gangs kind sort of things coming up.
So this is the late 80s, early 90s in France.
Then for those guys, yes, they were basically
Yeah, yeah.
20 years later. Yes, yeah, exactly. And then at this point started to come another feature, which is that the religious associations started to go into the suburbs, telling parents, look, rather than seeing your kids in the streets, why don't you let your king come to the religious association, because then he's not going to be involved in crime and so forth. And that was somehow led by the French government, because the imams were financed by foreign countries. The French government didn't want to, because the secularity kind of tradition, to get
Right.
involved much into that. And that created this mixture, which generated now this sense of identity, ethnic or religious identity, that is closely related to Islam in those neighborhoods. So this a whole set of phenomena that happened one after the other that led to the situation where we are now. And clearly, the French institutional system didn't adjust to those changes progressively.
Well, that fits with what other friends and observers that have been asking this, because it has, it has relevance for understanding the situation, but also the situation in the United States and in general, right? We are facing this issue of uh, managing, in a way or another, the flow of immigrants, people from countries that have substantial, strong Islamic component. I would say it's by far the largest religion of immigrants or migrants in this moment. So
Yeah.
one wants to understand from, the French experience in some sense starts way before everybody for the reason you said. And so one wants to understand what. So if you had to get to a close and not to take too much of your time, I'm sorry. If you had to say two things, not even three, two things that are actually feasible politically, not socially, not culturally, let's not get too big, but politically, with a political decision that you believe may help, even if they're strong choices, and forget about having the majority approving it or not. If they make you super president, where would you try to go to face this issue?
I think that one feature will be to move away from, let's say, place policies, like what is done right now in France, which is a strong tradition of, you want to solve the problem by making the people being integrated where they live. So you
Right.
construct social housing. But what happens at the end is that those people get trapped because they cannot move, because without the social housing, where they can find a house somewhere else. And
That's reminds enormously the projects in United States that
yeah,
became the source of the worst ghettos.
yeah. So you want to move away from place-based policies to something which is individual-based policies. You want to help the people directly at the level of the individuals, rather, or the families, rather than, let's say, okay, we target particular neighborhoods, we target particular areas. uh, it seems that it doesn't work. It's the world. It's a world change of the philosophy of the social integration policies in France, because we really have so far all the programs, whether about subsidies on schools, whether about subsidies on work, whether about subsidies on housing, is social, is place based. And at the
And
end,
not to
after,
people, not to
and not
marry
the
their
people, not
interests,
enough the people.
individual and
No,
family.
exactly. It's not at the level of the people. And I think that's probably something that's
One,
going to be
let
very
me
hard.
one interruption, and I'll let you continue. One criticism that, well, you know it better than me, right? That this is actually part of your research work, but I have to play my role. One criticism to going the individual is, well, the best, those most gifted, those that have a better attitude, that are a bit better off, will move, will take advantage of the incentive, and whatever positive external effect they may have on the social culture, on the system of values of the neighbor, will disappear. Neighbor will become even worse.
Yes, that's true. That's true. That's one of the problem that one faces with individual based policies. Now, I mean, exactly what came up from that report from the Cour des Comptes on the urban policies in France over more than 10 years is that when you look at those neighborhoods, the good guys go out and nobody gets in. So already people go out and they try to put a lot of money to rehabilitate the neighborhoods, bringing new buildings and stuff. The middle class doesn't want to go there. You stigmatize basically those places, and you create actually places where the gangs and the illegal trafficking can settle. And then that's it. You anchor basically, and it's an equilibrium. So situation which is very hard to move.
So try
When,
to empty the ghetto and stop subsidizing the ghetto. That sounds,
yeah, yeah,
that would be
that will be.
revolutionary also in United States, but I would actually, my surprise, you tend to agree.
No, I
From
agree.
my experience, I mean, I've been looking at the St. Louis ghetto for 15 years now, and yes, that's definitely what I believe. Either you empty that place, you'll never get out of it.
No, exactly. But that's politically very, very difficult to make people accept that, and administratively as well, because all the organization of fundings and from the state, from the local communities, from the
Yeah, true.
municipalities, it's all organized in a way which is completely different. The second feature is really to get to a point where people get tools to evaluate clearly the true impact of those policies. Right now, again, this Cour des Comptes report says we can't evaluate very precisely what happens. It's all mixed up. They don't collect data on what is relevant. In France, there's a big issue with collecting data on certain types of characteristics, which are related to ethnicity and religion. Uh, but somehow you have to find a way to deal with that. Otherwise, you will never be able to design policies that are well targeted to the people that need it most. So this is really a revolution as well in terms of social thinking about how to make things happen in France. And I'm not sure we'll get there, but those will be the two major push that might eventually make us go away from this vicious circle which we are trapped in.
Okay, well, Thierry, was very explicit, especially the last part, very, very direct to the point. And I suppose the second is even harder than the first because it implies breaking a taboo,
Yeah.
which is try to, well, you know better than me what the taboo is, you know. It's a very strong cultural taboo. Say, okay, you got to tell me, you know, what's your religion, what's your age, what's your culture, what's your sex, or whatever, blah blah blah, and then I'll try to, because I want to try to figure out where my actions make sense and where they don't, and where they hit a wall. All
Mm.
right, but well, thanks, and I hope it's interesting new meeting for the people listening to us, and maybe I'll bother you in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Michele, for
Thanks for your
letting me
time,
talk.
sir.
Thank you very
Take care.
much. See
Thank
you
you.
then. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Ciao a tutti e grazie per l'ascolto. Ciao ciao.
Ciao.